Welcome, everybody. Thanks for your patience today. Hopefully, we won't be using these virtual meetings too much longer, but we'll just deal with it while we are. For the meeting today, everybody is muted right now. If you need to say something, you need to unmute yourself before you speak. So, as you may remember from the last meeting, we've got a long sort of preamble that we have to state since we're having a virtual meeting and we're not in peace. So first part of the meeting, first part of the agenda is for me to call to order the meeting and then to read a very long statement. So I'll do that right now. Good morning. I call to order the 2022 Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board webpage following this meeting. If you're having technical difficulties hearing audio, you may try the phone line instead of using computer audio. To notify us of any issues with audio, you can also chat to staff using the Q&A tool within WebEx. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOA, this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It is a bit cumbersome, so I'll ask you in advance for your patience. First, because each member of this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating, that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at appropriate volume for all the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowner Advisory Board member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. All right, so for the roll call, I'm first on the list. You can hear me. Next is Mary Beth Advizian. So,
Advizian. Here. And I'm here.
Okay. All right, Jeff Fairfield.
I'm here, Ted, and I'm here in my office in the town of Herndon, Virginia.
All right, Mike Huber.
See him.
Sorry, I had to find the unmute. I was hitting on my little button. So Mike Huber, I'm at Stone Tower Winery in Leesburg, Virginia.
All right, good for you. Bill Keach is not here. Had an emergency come up. Pete McCabe.
Hey, good morning. I'm Pete McCabe, and I'm in Chantilly, Virginia.
All right. Leo Titus.
Good morning. I'm here. I'm calling safely from a Sheetz parking lot in Breezewood, Pennsylvania. I'm traveling today, so had to call in from the car.
All right, thanks. Jim Policaro.
Here, located in Rockville, Maryland.
All right. Scott Crabtree.
We saw him there earlier.
Scott?
Yeah, here, I'm in my office, Palenka, Lexus, Chantilly.
All right. And then Matthew Schultes.
Hi, good morning. I'm calling in from Germantown, Maryland.
Okay. And then how about Craig Fritchie?
I'm here as a non-voting member since I'm not reappointed yet, but I am here.
All right, got it. And then we have one other vacancy, which is a Fairfax County landowner, as Bill Matarazzo is no longer employed by COPT. So looks like we've got everybody. At this point, I will pass the virtual gavel to Mary Beth so that I may be heard to make the requisite motion.
I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board.
All right, thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, now, second, need for electronic meeting. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we arrange for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID pandemic makes it unsafe for this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board to physically assemble, and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that, as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated audio conferencing line, and that the public may access meeting by calling 1-844-992-4726 with a meeting access code number 2338-651-4195. It is so moved. Finally, it is next required that all matters addressed on today's agenda must address the emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County and Loudoun County government, and/or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations in the discharge of this Route 28 Highway Transportation Improvement District Landowners Advisory Board, lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. All right, I think that's all the written part. So the remaining agenda items, I'd like to introduce Susan Glass, Loudoun County's Department of
Mr. Chairman.
Transportation and Capital Infrastructure Special Projects Manager, and Brent Riddle, Fairfax County's Senior Transportation Planner, to announce the proof of notice and advertisement.
All right, thank you, Ted. Loudoun County and Fairfax County have posted the meeting on their respective web pages. The slide that's shown on the screen shows both jurisdictions.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, let's see. I think next we've got the fiscal year 2021 audit by Joe LaHaye. So let's see.
Joe was having some technical troubles getting into the meeting and was going down to a colleague's office.
Joe, you still there?
Oh, there he is. I see him on the screen.
Okay.
It looks like he's getting ready to unmute.
Ted, in the interim, I think there was a question raised on whether the motions that were just made have to be voted upon.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Tom Bashadny. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So for each of those three motions that you made, the two that you made, and I think the one that Mary Beth made, you actually need to take a vote on those motions, please.
All right. We'll take a vote. Let's see. The first one that want to vote is to make sure that each person's vote is adequately heard. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, I didn't hear any nays. So I'm going to assume that's unanimous. We okay to go that way? Okay, the next item is the need for electronic meeting, and that due to the COVID pandemic. And just wanted to affirm that we do need to have this electronic meeting. So we've made the motion to have it. If we could all vote on that, appreciate it.
Aye.
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 Okay. The last and final vote will be to verify that we're dispensing with FOIA's usual procedures to assure the continuity in government and continuing operations. The motion has been made. If we could have a vote on that, All those affirming, please say aye. Those disagreeing, say nay.
Aye.
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 All right. I think we got through all those unanimous. We'll document that. And let's see, Joe, are you ready to provide the 2021 audit? Is Joe muted?
No, it's Patty.
Chairman, I think Patty McCabe from Fairfax County was wanting to take the floor. Counsel for Fairfax County.
Yeah, I think I can see her fixing Joe, getting Joe set up. So hopefully he'll be ready to go here in a few seconds.
We've unmuted Patty, so.
Yeah, Patty, you're unmuted. So Joe, can you speak to see if we can hear you?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
here. Pardon that. I am showing as Patty McCabe, but hopefully, as you know, I'm still Joe LaHate. So thank you all for joining me here. Item number 3 on the agenda is fairly efficient as it normally is. We have an audit conducted on an annual basis by Jerry Becker, who also serves as auditor to both Loudoun and Fairfax County, respectively. They do the same set of financial review for the tax district. The attachment is provided in your handouts, but the main takeaway is they've come back with a clean, complete audit. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that kind of is my very quick and simple summary of this piece.
Okay, great. If there's any questions, just shout them out or hit us up in the chat. But assuming there are no questions on that, Joe, why don't we go to item 4, the Fairfax and Loudoun County assessment.
Gotcha. This is our standard financial update to give all things in the tax district here. So if we move to the next slide here, Courtney Rogers, Davenport, financial advisor to Loudoun County. Are you on the phone right now?
I'm here.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Courtney's going to add a little color commentary since a lot of what's happening in this district is being driven by the data centers, which, as you know, are a huge mainstay of Loudoun County and responsible for some of their land increases. So, Courtney, I'll turn it to you, then I'll grab the mic back after.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Good morning, everybody. So this really happened in the last week, but when we go back and look at what's happened over the last couple of years, the data center market has really taken off in the Route 28 district in Loudoun. And right now, data centers make up 57.8% of the district in terms of value, and they grew by almost a similar amount, 58.9% in the last year. And then what's happened, what we found out in the last week or so, at least, was made aware by myself and the folks over in Fairfax, is House Bill 791 and Senate Bill 513, which have now both passed unanimously in both respective houses, stipulate to change the way that the assessor is going to have to value data centers going forward. It's not certain exactly when it's going to go into effect. We think if it's passed, that it'll be July of this year, which of course will not affect this calendar year, which is when the assessed values are set. But we believe that there could be some appeals based on the new valuation that could affect the December collections. So while the January or the June collections for this January assessment are going to be a pretty nice jump, we are afraid that values are going to get beat up in December, and that the values that are the amounts that we collect are going to be down significantly. Based on what the staff at Loudoun knows right now, they think the total value could go down by 30% for tax year 23, so it would be effective calendar year next year. But that all is going to be dependent upon things such as the age of some of these data centers, the equipment that are in the data centers, the age of those equipment, because it's basically going to go back to a depreciation type schedule. So there's no real known number at this point of how much it's going to be effective. And so we're kind of working a little bit in the dark. But essentially, what we think is going to happen is, unless there's some real changes that we're not aware of, we think it's going to, if you take out the anomaly of this 1 year, that the average is going to be roughly aligned with what we've seen in the last few years in terms of historical averages. So when you look at the year-over-year growth for Fairfax, it's been about a 3% growth. The county on Loudoun side is at 29.53, but again, a lot of that has to do with those data centers. And so we think that the growth on the Loudoun side is going to revert back to the mean once the changes are taken into account. happy to answer any questions. Joe, if you want to add anything else from the Fairfax side.
Yeah, no, I think that's why Corinne, we wanted your side to give some commentary. I think things are fairly smoother and more in line with traditional growth year over year from the Fairfax side. So we thought this was really, really helpful just to give some context, especially since the percent bump is so high.
And so Courtney, just to be clear, if you take out the data centers, what I had read was sort of that the increase, I guess, in real estate assessment would be is it pretty similar to what Fairfax County was this year for 3%?
It's slightly above. If we use, and again, this 30% number is really just, I'll call it an educated guess at this point from staff, because they really haven't dug into, they don't have enough information yet, on these data centers, and this has happened so quickly. But if we use the 30% number, we look at and come back into the 58% of the growth being, or of the amount of values being on the data center side, we come up with about a 7.5% increase on the Loudoun side, and a lot of that has to do with just new businesses coming into the district.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Courtney or Joe regarding the assessments?
I do. This is Mary Beth Abedisian. I hadn't heard about this House bill or Senate bill, and from the description that you're, as you're talking, it sounds to me like you're expecting that they're going to value data centers lower than currently. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. So, yeah, I think, and I'm not an expert here, but what we understand is they're currently valued based on the wattage used, the amount of power that's used by the data centers, and I don't know who brought up the bill and why, but the new bill would basically go back to more of a traditional depreciation type schedule, so that it's more of what is the value of the equipment in the building and things like that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on to item 5, and I'd like to introduce Laura Farmer to discuss the report on the final bill.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes?
Joe LaHaye, possible I could just finish out some of those slides just to give a little further financial context and pardon me.
Oh, that's all right. I'm sorry, Joe. You go ahead. I forgot about that. Go ahead. Sorry.
So suffice it to say, I think Mr. Rogers and I captured some of the main theme for this year's change with the huge bump in valuations here, especially on the Loudoun side. But the following slides just give a little further financial context as to how things have looked in district in the past and some thoughts from our side going forward here. Again, what you can see right now is based on this current, it's probably one of the biggest jumps we've seen since the late 2007, 2008 time period, knowing that there was a different set of circumstances going on in the economy at that time. Loudoun clearly has taken the larger percentage of the pie, given the growth that they've had. But suffice it to say, I think what you've seen here over the periods here is some pretty good, strong, positive growth when comparison over a 5-year and both a 10-year perspective as well, too. So obviously that's assessed value on slide 8. Those values times the tax rate essentially gives the spin-off in revenue growth on an annual basis, which is what we use right now to pay the debt service off. And again, just giving you some basics here. So like I said, we think we're going to finish strong for the current fiscal year. The question really becomes what happens in FY23, given the uncertainty regarding the valuation of the data center. So that's why you're kind of seeing a little bit of a flat, slightly negative growth revenue from 22 to 23, bringing in roughly in our range, probably about $26 million approximately in tax revenues on the current rate of 17 cents on property owners. So that just kind of gives you an idea there. So that's our essential numerator. Slide 9 gives you a preview of where we are in terms of the district's debt profile. So 2 things. If you recall, about this time last year, we had asked for your permission to move forward on a refinancing of the EDA Series 2012 bonds. And we did that, navigating a few standard challenges within the market, but we completed that just a few weeks ago and ultimately netted us about $6.6 million net present value savings. That translates to just about $650K per year. So you can see the prior debt profile on the dotted red line where we are right now, given the bar comparison by fiscal year there. So give us a little bit of a cushion, a relief, which is obviously helpful. Anything we can do to lower those debt service payments, to give more flexibility, have a greater margin on an annual basis, is obviously within our total financial favor. And then we just kind of give some snapshots here in terms of what's left outstanding on the debt. Like I said, right now, as it stands right now, the final year is 2037. That has not changed. Whenever we do a refinancing, we do not extend beyond the final original maturity. So we're paying off what we had to, not trying to get any more flexibility out of that. On slide 10, again, just kind of looking back, you know, our margins, otherwise known as debt service coverage, how much of a buffer on a year-to-year basis do we have between tax district revenue and debt service? The stronger those values come in, the greater the revenue spin off, and the greater that margin between tax revenues and debt service, hence the greater coverage. You know, we had the big booms in the 07 and 08. We thought we were in a pretty good position, lower the tax rate, then the values drop. So you can see within a matter of 4 or 5 years, we lost a significant amount of coverage to the point that things were fairly tight in 11 and 12 at just about 1.05, 1.06. Just having a little bit enough of revenues to meet those debt service coverage payments on an annual basis. Suffice it to say, we've had good, consistent growth over the last couple of years, and that's what you've seen the uptick in those coverage levels, getting us back to that 140 timeframes you're seeing in there. For FY23, you know, we do have a discount built in there based on what we had cited before on the Loudoun side. So we're looking at about 1.46. We're essentially kind of dialing back what we think that assessed value could be for Loudoun County, not necessarily 10 billion, more about 8.6 billion based on some conversations with their Commissioner of Revenue's office. So we're trying to be conservative, trying to make our best estimate right now. But again, a lot of the facts associated with that are still unknown, but we feel it's prudent to kind of dial back and not assume the full capture of what that excess current right now, $10 billion, is on the Loudoun side. So best projections right now. And again, this is at 17 cents for our current tax rate. On the next slide, I want to give people some context because they ask this a lot. You know, what does this district have to kind of cover itself as far as excess revenues? Obviously, you've got assessed value times tax district tax rate. That gives you revenues. But beyond that, we have 3 buckets here. And we highlight this before the rating agencies. And it really stands as good, solid credit profile. The project completion fund, if there is excess revenues on an annual basis beyond what's needed for debt service, it goes into this bucket. This bucket has been incredibly helpful in prior years. It's covered design, it's covered construction, paid miscellaneous bills. It's been a huge, huge advantage to us. And there's 2 other pieces we have here that are essentially equal to 1-year debt service. The first one is the Revenue Stabilization Fund, or the RSF. That's funded at our maximum annual debt service, roughly about $18 million or so. And then we have one more piece, which is otherwise known as the Debt Service Reserve Fund. That's fully funded right now with a combination of cash and a surety policy. Ultimately, if that one was ever tapped, both counties would have to backfill it at a 50% split. To date, we have not had to do that, but it does ultimately serve as a huge backstop and major credit game changer for this tax district. So just want to give some context. And for the second and third one, for the RSF and the DSRF, if neither of those 2 reserves were ever tapped over the course of the district's profile right now, they could essentially cover the last 2 years of debt service. So we view it as just kind of a first and last month's rent, as some of you may have in your equivalent financial profiles. But again, it serves to help kind of prop it up and be stronger right now. But if they're not needed, we don't plan that they will be, they can knock off that debt a little bit earlier than otherwise programmed. And on slide 12.
Joe, before you go on, I guess I just want to make sure I understand. The last bullet on the project completion fund says target a minimum balance of half the maximum annual debt services. And so that's I guess suggesting to keep half the balance in that fund, but there's no construction left, correct?
That's correct. And that kind of ties into the next slide too, but the conversation is really the same, that it's cash available. It's a best practice we've had some conversations with from both financial advisors on the Loudoun and Fairfax side. And we view it as really a flexible source to use. That if for some reason, if not next year, and not trying to be the pessimist, that tax revenues did not accrue to what we needed to meet those debt service obligations. If we were hypothetically $1, $2, or maybe even $3 million short, you've got an option of obviously raising the tax rate to generate those funds, or you could dip into that bucket and cover your shortfall. So that's one of those things where we're kind of just recommending we hold to always sort of have as the back pocket, and it's an easy ability for us to kind of go after and potentially use if need be. So that was essentially kind of the basis we've had for that recommendation of that half MADS or maximum annual debt service equivalent.
Is there a need to continue to fund that going forward?
So I think going forward, we'd like to. I think especially in light of not knowing where we stand right now with the data center valuations, because as you'll see right now, we do recommend no change in the tax rate at 17 cents, but if something more drastically to change, and we have dialed back the assessed value assumption, we do believe it is a nice extra revenue source to have on hand. I will say there is extra revenue above and on top and free and clear from that. But if you don't mind, I'll just kind of walk you through here that there will be excess revenues, and that being above and beyond what's needed for debt service payments this year. And that essentially translates to line item E on this slide, roughly to the tune of about $10.7 million. Already holding back the 9.4 in the project completion fund for that half MADS reserve. We're recommending actually pulling that money and prepaying some outstanding debt that we have with the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So I think there's kind of a balance we're looking for of having some flexibility to hold some cash on hand, but not having too much to give the appearance we're just sitting on too much cash and not putting it to use. So in this case, based on what we're saying for line item E, we're going to take that 10.7 and prepay a pretty good chunk of the CTB debt that's sitting out there right now. And then theoretically about this time next year, hopefully to be in the same situation, we have an additional accumulation of funds within the same bucket that we would try to essentially pay off the balance of that CTB debt. And that essentially is line item H, about $8.2 million. So I think there's just kind of a balance here. And I think maybe just to give some context, if either Joanne Carter from PFM or Courtney Rogers from Davenport just kind of want to give some feedback from what a credit rating agency might view of what kind of debt reserve should you have, how much too little, happy medium. So I'll stop there. If you could just give a little context there, one of you.
Randy, go ahead.
Sure, Joe. Hi, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Joanne Carter from PFM. I think that, the two reserves that we have, the Revenue Stabilization Fund and the Debt Service Reserve Fund, are there a security, but the expectation of both bondholders and the rating agencies is that they would never realistically be tapped. And so the project completion fund is sort of the fail-safe that we would go to first. And I think it's the county's preferences to use those dollars as opposed to having to raise the tax rate. The maximum tax rate in this district by statute is 20 cents, which we're obviously below that. So I think it just adds a measure of flexibility that the rating agencies appreciate when they evaluate this credit, because no one's looking for the counties, either of the counties' backstop to actually be triggered. So this provides additional cushion, if you will, against that event, which the credit markets would not want to see.
And I think just adding to that, just this uncertainty, the agencies don't know about this uncertainty with the values, but once we come back and talk to them the next time, it's just going to put a little bit more of a question mark behind, the values and things like that as we go forward. And the other thing to Joe, you might want to go back to the slide with the debt service chart and just show them that green part when the CTB bonds go away, we're going to have even lower debt service at that point. So the whole goal here is to sort of a balance of keeping our credit up, but also being able to pay some of this off early, which in turn will lower the overall debt service and will allow us to hopefully knock the tax rate down in the future, especially once we get a handle on these new valuations.
And I just think the further context of the data centers are about 60% of the Loudoun piece, and they're roughly about a third of the total value of this district. So, I mean, it's a pretty high level of concentration. That's obviously given us some incredible booms, but we just want to make sure we're cautiously managing going forward with any potential fluctuations with them. But I think the key piece I'd like to stress is that, there's a lot of cash being generated in this district. and we're obviously doing the main priority, meeting all debt service obligations for the sake of the credit rating and both counties' reputation. And the excess above and on top of that, we are putting to good use, not letting that sit on top of that $9.4 million. We're doing what we simply can at this point, paying off debt. As much as we all know and are incredibly thankful for, all the construction costs have been paid. So there is nothing further invoice-wise. So the next step up right now is taking the next set of debt, and it's the CTBs, pay that off. And we believe by the end of FY23, we can have that fully paid off, which is roughly the $15.7 million figure right there. And then beginning in FY24 and beyond, we would pick the next debt up and move on that one. And that would be the EDA Series 2016 and start prepaying that. So again, just trying to put all this money to good, obviously narrow use, which isn't fully what it's intended for.
If I could interrupt for a minute, this is Mary Beth Abedesian, and Ted, I don't know if this is as good a point as any to bring up the issue we were talking about last week, but I think that
Sure.
it's pretty clear here that the data centers are very important to making sure that we can continue to pay these bonds and have a healthy cushion. And as many of you may or may not know, I guess, is that Loudoun County is trying to downzone properties that are currently approved to be data centers and remove them from an approved use under, say, PDIP zoning, for instance. So they're trying to downzone them to prevent data centers from being constructed on certain properties, mostly along Route 7. But some of those properties are in the tax district. And we need to make sure somebody passes the word on to the county, whoever is spearheading this data center downzoning, that they can't touch the zoning on any properties within the tax district pursuant to the state law that put the whole tax district in place in the first place. Because obviously we want to protect the values of the properties that could still continue to be developed with data centers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did hear back from James David on that issue, and I it's still very early in the process. He did acknowledge that the Route 28 district does have some, has the 72 ordinance, which can't be touched. And I am trying to arrange a time where he can come in and speak to our group to talk a little bit more detail about that issue, Mary Beth. So hopefully we'll be able to get him on board, either this summer or this fall to touch base on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, picking back up here on slide 13, now that we've paid all our invoices to VDOT, we are managing for debt service on an annual basis. And I think if one thing we can kind of give a little bit of optimism as we move into the future here is we want to properly balance this. We want to essentially take some excess cash, as I cited previously, both in FY22 and FY23, and try to eliminate entirely, which we believe we can, the CTB 2012 debt. And that'd be a great additional lift, off the debt profile here. But also probably around this time next year, provided we've got some stability that's leveled out in terms of where things stand with the data center, we'd like to put together, a targeted coverage level on an annual basis. So as not to keep the tax rate too high, too low, but to have it kind of met what's traditionally tied to a revenue bond. So there's a proper margin on an annual basis. So with that, there still could be excess revenue generated on an annual basis. And we had our financial advisors model something right now that just assumes a fairly modest 1.5% growth in land value, which in some respects is even more conservative than what we've seen traditionally. And we believe we can actually knock off about 3 years from the current debt profile using some of that excess cash to retire that debt a little bit earlier. Obviously, if we get higher growth values, there may be an ability to even pay it off even sooner. But this is one thing right now, I think we just want to be able to kind of continue to model and update on an annual basis as we get more updates to land values and we have the ability to prepay. We can keep trying to just get that end date finished a little bit sooner. So we think it tells a pretty good story here, even on some fairly conservative growth assumptions of 1.5%.
All right, great.
And then on slide 14, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, could I interrupt again? I'm sorry.
Yep, sure, Mary Beth. Yep.
Just a question, and that is, some of the property owners enjoy certain protections under the 72 ordinance. And so paying off the bonds early doesn't necessarily help those property owners that enjoy the protections of being in the tax district. And of course, we know once the bonds are paid off, the zoning goes to whatever is the, then current zoning in Loudoun County in fact. So the question is it worth considering lowering the tax rate and keeping to the same 2037 payoff date as opposed to accumulating a war chest and paying it off sooner? Is that an evaluation that we should consider? And I know that's something that this broader group maybe wants to discuss, but I think you have the tools to determine what that tax rate could be dropped to, and for the next 15 years or whatever, we could enjoy a lower tax rate as well as the protections of the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, good point. I'm not as familiar with the zoning ordinance, but I think we always were looking for somewhat of a happy medium to pay it off early and give a little bit of a tax rate reduction and to find some point in that middle ground here. But suffice it to say, we can model things appropriately based on any recommendations from this group and return next year with options and the corresponding slides.
Ted, it's Jeff Fairfield. Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Joe, the interest rate on the CTB bonds, are they generally higher than the EDA bonds?
That's a good question. I actually would say lower. I don't know if Ms. Carter or Mr. Rogers could back me up on that.
Well, so the question in my mind is, I realize the CTB bonds are callable, but that doesn't mean they would be called. So are you deploying the additional cash strategically to reduce the debt service?
Yeah, we believe it's the next most logical step to knock out those CTBs right now, since they are callable. And provided, as we've had conversations with the VDOT staff before too, we do really plan over the course of the next 2 years to almost knock them out in 2 different increments with some of that excess cash.
I don't know.
Then we would go.
I was going to say, I don't know if Joanne may have the answer, but the reason we would take the callables out first, even if they have lower coupons, is it can be very expensive to take out the longer bonds in terms of the longer call date, because you have to invest at what's today currently very low interest rates. And so you end up doing better putting the money to work, taking out the more recent callable bonds than later callable bonds. But Joanne, you have the numbers there.
I do. So the CTB bonds, which are currently callable now, they reach their call date on April 1. They have higher coupons. So we're looking at a 4% coupon due in 2030 and in 2031, and then a 3 1/8 coupon in 2032, and a 3% coupon in 2029. So those are the most efficient bonds to take out with cash at the moment. In part for not only the coupon levels, but also for the reason that Courtney mentioned, where we are at the call date, and so we don't have the negative cost of carry associated with putting dollars at very low interest rates in place until April 1, 2026. That's what we would need to do to take out the next series of bonds that are callable, which are the 2016s. So that comes at a cost. So we are taking out the ones that are the most financially advantageous at this time in consideration of the call date and the coupon rate.
And I will add that should the Fed should they raise rates like we expect them to do here in a couple of weeks, and they continue doing that, then those shorter term rates are going to go up, and then it may make sense a year from now or 2 years from now to put those dollars in an escrow and pay off the other bonds, the non-CTB bonds. So we'll keep evaluating that as we go forward.
So just kind of tying in with the last slide here, it sort of summarizes our recommendations right now. We do believe we should stay at 17 cents for the tax rate, just given some of the aforementioned factors associated with the data centers. Review that again this time next year. We'd like to hold on to the project completion fund, 50% MADS balance of about $9.4 million. Again, as we just said, begin the payment process for the CTB 2012 bonds, since they are callable. And then going forward, probably this time next year, have an idea of a coverage level we'd like to kind of steer towards on an annual basis, which will kind of dictate where that tax rate could be to ensure obviously debt service requirements are met, and anything left above and beyond that could be used to continue to prepay our debt on an annual basis. So that kind of summarizes our takeaways and recommendations to you all today.
And Joe, I guess with this, I did hear you say that next year you would also evaluate the impact of just using that money to lower the tax rate so that the landowners can sort of evaluate the two options?
Yes, we can build that into the analysis as well too. Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep. I think naturally a staff perspective is pay it off as soon as possible. So yeah, the differing points will obviously add that to the equation as well too.
Okay, anything else on the update from Joe? All right, hearing none, now I would like to introduce Laura Farmer to discuss the report on the final billing for the Route 28 project.
Good morning. My name is Laura Farmer. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at VDOT. The Northern Virginia District staff provided some support to me to provide the status report on the completed projects. The change from last year's meeting is the completion and billing on the Route 28 widening northbound Route 50 to McLaren or Area 4. That has been complete and billed to the district, and the final invoice was paid in February. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but this report demonstrates the final project cost across each improvement.
Okay. Any questions? All right. Hearing none, the next thing we'd like to go to is the staff recommendation item in the packet. And Joe, I think that's yours, right? You just sort of had that up.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I think it right back to that last slide I had previously. So
Okay. Before we vote on our the staff recommendation, we need to go through a couple of comment periods. The first one will be for the Landowners Advisory Board, and I'm going to go through and ask each board member if they have any comment. You certainly are able to comment. You don't have to make a comment, but I want to make sure that's available. Then Susan will go through public comment period if there's anybody from the public that wants to say something. So I'll start off. I do not have a comment. So I'll turn it over to Mary Beth to see if you have any comments.
I'd like to have staff add another bullet point to their recommendation list, and that's in the future years to consider a tax rate reduction so that the debt does not have to be paid off early.
Okay. I think that'll be a problem. Jeff Fairfield, do you have a comment?
My comment is I support setting the rate or recommending the rate be set at 17 cents per $100 valuation for the upcoming fiscal year. As far as when the final indebtedness of the district is retired, I'll listen to any alternative staff might project, but I think I have a preference for concluding the debt service and sunsetting this district at the earliest possible date. So this tax is no longer a burden on the landowners subject to the special tax.
Okay. Mike Huber, do you have a comment?
Well, first of all, I thought it was a good meeting. It was very informative. It's great to have the all the construction complete out there, that's for sure. And I would agree with Mary Beth that, I think we can enjoy reduced tax rates as we move forward. I understand, right now with the uncertainty with data centers and things like that, to leave it just kind of as is. But I would enjoy, just kind of keeping that target date and just have a reduced tax rate, moving forward.
Okay. All right. Bill Keach is not here, so Pete McCabe, do you have a comment?
No comments from me.
Okay. Leo Titus, do you have a comment?
No comment. Thank you.
Jim Polacaro, do you have a comment?
I would just reiterate what's been said, and I think for our future discussion, just have this Joe's group prepare the planning document with both a 2037 sunset and a 2033 sunset, and see how that affects the tax rates, and we can look at it then.
Okay, great. Scott Crabtree, do you have a comment?
No comment.
And Matt Schultes, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just I would, without having a full understanding of the differences between the Route 28 zoning and the current Loudoun County zoning, I would like to see how, those differences, those affordabilities, that would be held should we run the full period of the tax rate out. Understand how some people might benefit from those I guess changes should we sunset early.
Okay, thank you. I think that's comments from everybody. So now I'd like to call on Susan Glass to moderate the public comment period.
All righty. So that would be Craig. You're the only public member that we have on this call. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much. It's very informative. When I saw the jump in the valuation of Loudoun, I was shocked it was staying at 17 cents. But now that I've heard the presentation, it makes perfect sense. So I support that. And I do agree with the other members that I would prefer to sunset it early if possible. I agree with the recommendations currently provided. Thanks.
Okay. So the last thing we need to do is actually vote. We've got to vote on 3 different elements, so I'll take everybody's patience on this. The first one is on your screen that Joe has got us the staff recommendation. And because we're virtual on this one, I can't get away with just doing everybody vote at once. I think we have to go down the roll call for this. So I'm just going to go down the roll call and document your votes for each of the things we'll be looking at. The first is on your screen. It's the staff recommendations to the advisory board on the tax rate and how we're maintaining the funds. I'm the first person on the list, and I would vote to approve staff's recommendation. Mary Beth, you're next.
Well, subject to adding the bullet point I requested, which I know is hard to do in a virtual meeting, that being to evaluate the other option of lowering the tax rate and leaving the provision for paying off the bonds at 2037. I'm okay with the rest of the items that are proposed here. So I'm not quite sure how you can put a subject to adding that bullet point, but you have my vote at least to maintain the tax rate at 17 cents.
Well, Mary Beth, Joe agreed to do that in front of us all, so I'm going to hold him to his word. I think he will come through with that next year, so I think we can be confident with that.
Then you have my vote of approval.
All right, great. All right, Jeff Fairfield is next.
I vote to endorse each of the staff recommendations on slide 19 on the desktop.
All right. And next is Mike Huber.
I would vote to approve, and all the motions, and the last motion, that bullet point was to consider an annual debt service coverage target. So, to pay off early, and I have no problem considering it.
All right, good deal. Bill Keach is absent. Pete McCabe.
I vote to approve.
Okay. Leo Titus,
Approve.
Jim Polacaro,
Approve.
Scott Crabtree,
Approve.
Matt Schultes.
Approve.
Okay, the next vote will be on the Landowners Advisory Board's fiscal year 2023 annual budget, which I believe is set at $20,000 each year. Again, this is a budget that we have never used, but in the event we need legal representation, there is a budget available for that. So the vote is for whether you approve the budget of $20,000 for the advisory board. And I'll be the first on the budget. I'll vote a yes for that. Mary Beth?
Yes, approve.
Yeah. Jeff Fairfield?
Yes.
Mike Huber?
Yes.
Yeah. Pete McCabe?
Yes.
Leo Titus?
Yes.
Jim Polacaro?
Yes.
Scott Crabtree?
Yes.
And Matt Schultes, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. All right, the last vote we have is for election of officers, for chairman and vice chair. Current chairman is me, the vice chair is Bill Keach. We're both certainly willing to serve, but if there are other individuals that are interested, you can nominate them and we'll go through that process. So the vote would be either to re-elect the existing officers to a new term or to propose new officers.
I cannot possibly imagine new officers. I enthusiastically endorse the re-election of our incumbent officers.
Well, I appreciate that, Jeff. All right, I'll vote for it also. Mary Beth?
Couldn't get my unmute button fast enough. Yes, I enthusiastically would love for you to re-up for another term.
All right, thank you. I got Jeff's vote. Mike Huber?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Pete McCabe?
Yes, thank you for doing this, and absolutely yes.
No problem. Jim Polacaro? I got you, Leo, a second to get so. Jim?
Yes, I vote to approve the current chairman and vice chairman.
Scott Crabtree?
Thank you for your service. Yes.
All right. Matt Schultes?
Yes, approve and thank you.
No problem. Okay, I think that's the last item we have on the agenda. I really appreciate everybody's patience getting through this virtual. Hopefully next year we will be meeting in person. And I have a feeling we will be meeting in person later this year. I'd really like to dig into the data center issue for Route 7, this prohibition, and see if we can get something set up for that. But if anybody has any other questions or needs any information, let us know. I assume this package, they've already got the info, so there should be no change from that. Is there any other business that we need to talk about at this meeting?
No, we have the Route 28 Tax District Commission meeting scheduled for Friday, March 11th at 9 o'clock in the morning.
And that is a virtual meeting also, I assume?
Yes, we are hoping so. So Loudoun County is ending its COVID emergency. We squeaked this advisory board meeting right under the wire as a virtual meeting. So tomorrow's board meeting, they're going to, looks like they're going to end the emergency, and we're still trying to figure out how that affects the commission meeting, but I believe it's going to be a virtual meeting.
Okay. Well, all advisory board members are invited to that meeting, and so once we get the information on where it is and how it's going to be held. We'll send that out to you. It'll be an identical meeting to this one. Just the difference will be the commissioners will be voting. Joe will give the same presentation, that type of thing. So we'll get that information out to everybody as soon as we get it. So with that, hearing nothing else, I'll let you guys get back to your day and really appreciate your time for our annual meeting. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you all.
Thank you.